I'm Sue. Are you ready? Let's go.
A person's gloved hand injects a mysterious substance into an egg yolk, and within minutes, the yolk splits, creating an identical egg. Meanwhile, a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame is unveiled for Elizabeth Sparkle, an Oscar-winning actress. Time passes, her star fades, and the name Sparkle no longer shines so brightly. Now, she hosts a TV aerobics show. Despite her age, Elizabeth maintains excellent shape. One day, she heads to the restroom, but finding the ladies out of order, she enters the men's room. In a stall, she overhears her show's producer Harvey saying Elizabeth is outdated and the show needs a young and hot girl. It's time for Sparkle to go, as her Oscar was earned back in cinema's golden days. Disappointed, Elizabeth goes to lunch with Harvey, but he leaves early with a friend, not finishing their conversation. Elizabeth notices a fly in her wine glass, feeling just as helpless. On her way home, she's distracted by workers taking down her billboard, and she gets into an accident. In the hospital, the doctor recognizes her and compliments her, but Elizabeth begins to cry, realizing her fame is in the past. Embarrassed, he leaves, but a young nurse suddenly starts examining Elizabeth's back, muttering that she would be perfect for a certain experiment. As he leaves, he slips a flash drive with an ad for a substance called The Substance into her pocket. Elizabeth reads the name of the product when a man calls her. It's her old classmate, Fred, who's thrilled to see her and suggests they meet to reminisce. He writes down his number on a random piece of paper that gets wet in a puddle, but still hands it to her. She pretends to be happy to see her old friend, but really, she sinks into depression, especially after finding a bouquet at home with a card thanking her for having been a part of the team. After contemplating the word bin, Elizabeth inserts the flash drive into her TV and watches the ad. The injection supposedly unlocks DNA, triggering cell division to create a new version of oneself. These two personalities must coexist and switch places every 7 days, remembering they are a single entity. Elizabeth heads to a bar and, watching happy couples, feels her loneliness. She returns home and, after long reflections and memories, calls the number to order the substance. She is given the number of a P.O. box to pick up the product, and the line goes dead. She spends a sleepless night, then sees an ad in the newspaper looking for candidates to take her place on the show. In her P.O. box, she finds an envelope with a card and a number for the locker where she can retrieve the substance, and she decides to pick it up. Using the card, she unlocks a passage in the wall of an old building and enters a storage room where the package awaits. At home, Elizabeth unpacks it. All ingredients of the substance are neatly labeled: activator, stabilizer, food for the matrix, food for the other version. The activator is to be used only once, with daily stabilizer doses required. The main rule is that the personalities must swap places every 7 days, always remembering they are one whole. In the morning, Elizabeth looks in the mirror for a long time, noting signs of age. Finally, she administers the one-time activator injection, after which she is overtaken by unbearable pain. She falls to the floor, racked with agony, as her back splits open, and from her emerges a younger version of herself. This new persona gradually gains consciousness and, approaching the mirror, sees the reflection of a young and strikingly beautiful woman. She enjoys her new state for a while, before noticing Elizabeth's body lying on the floor. The girl tidies up Elizabeth's body, stitching up the slit on her back, and then heads to Elizabeth's bed. In the morning, she takes a shower but suddenly feels unwell. She injects herself with the stabilizer, then goes out, relishing her new, young, and strong body. Later, she heads to a casting, buying a seductive swimsuit along the way. She adopts the name Sue and makes a stunning impression on the producer's assistants and eventually on Harvey himself. Sue is selected as Elizabeth's replacement on the show. She immediately warns that every 7 days she'll need to leave to care for her sick mother, which wins over Harvey completely, since viewers will love such a caring heroine. Sue begins to revel in the fame that once belonged to her original self. Each day she uses the stabilizer, placing Elizabeth's body on a comfortable mat. The week flies by, and soon it's time for the change. Sue attaches special tubes to her arms, injects the substance, and Elizabeth comes to her senses as Sue's body falls into a coma. Elizabeth freshens up and heads to the television studio, where Harvey gives her a gift from the crew. Returning home, she marks the days she can be herself on the calendar, spending this time alone at home. Soon she receives a message about a new batch of the substance delivered to her P.O. box. A week later, they switch again. Sue enjoys her new life, shoots commercials, and revels in her growing popularity. One day, reflecting on the Matrix body, Sue sets up a hidden room in the bathroom. When the work is almost complete, her neighbor knocks, irritated by the noise. But seeing Sue, he's immediately captivated and offers to help. Sue shuts the door in his face and hides Elizabeth's body in the secret room, then takes Elizabeth's portrait off the wall and replaces it with her own. Sue's show is a massive success, ratings soar, and the producers are thrilled, swimming in profits. Sue makes new connections, attends parties, but one night when she brings a young man home, she suddenly feels unwell, realizing it's time for the switch. She rushes to the hidden room and performs an additional stabilization procedure, spends the night with the guy, and switches with Elizabeth a bit later than she should. Elizabeth, upon waking, notices the mess in the living room and sees her fingers are twisted. After tidying up, she calls the substance number, but they only remind her not to forget they are one and inform her that the changes are now irreversible. Elizabeth cleans the apartment and then sees Sue's new show on TV, admitting that Sue looks fantastic. Later, she hears her neighbor asking Sue out, but doesn't answer the door. Eventually, she receives a new batch of the substance. On her way, Elizabeth stops by a cafe where an old man approaches her, complaining that waiting 7 days to return to his body is too long. He drops some cards, among which Elizabeth spots one identical to her own substance card, and she recognizes him as the young nurse who had once suggested the experiment. He warns her that with each switch, it becomes harder to remember that she deserves to exist, and soon the other self will start to consume her. Elizabeth rushes home, bumping into Sue's boyfriend, who, of course, doesn't recognize her. This encounter makes her think of Fred. She dials his number and they agree to meet at a cafe. Elizabeth dresses up, puts on makeup, and hides her hands under gloves, but then sees her reflection on a billboard and feels disappointed. She changes her makeup and eventually removes it entirely. Later, she breaks down, removes her dress, and stays home, ignoring Fred's persistent calls, binge eating to cope with her stress and insecurities. When it's Sue's turn again, she heads to the set and starts the show. However, during one of the exercises, she suddenly feels something protruding under her skin on her thighs. She immediately stops filming, and while the bewildered cameraman tries to understand what he's just captured, she rushes to the restroom. There, she finds a lump and pulls out a fried chicken drumstick. Sue realizes that while she's living an active life, Elizabeth is binge eating at home, and she begins to feel angry. She complains to the substance operator, but hears only one response: "You are one and the same." Weeks pass. One day, Harvey urgently summons Sue to inform her that she'll be the new host of their New Year's Eve show, the pinnacle of her career. She's thrilled, but she begins to overuse the stabilizer, causing Elizabeth's body to age rapidly. When Elizabeth next regains consciousness, she finds herself old and weakened, and the substance operator suggests ending the experiment, though restoring her former state is now impossible. She tries to convince herself to let go of the experience, but she can't bear to say goodbye to her beautiful alternate self, despite her joints failing to function properly. Elizabeth remembers Harvey's gift, which turns out to be a cookbook. Enthusiastically, she begins learning new recipes, while Sue dominates the screens. One day, Elizabeth overhears Sue mocking her as an aging star, stoking her anger further. Furious, Elizabeth stockpiles enough stabilizer for 3 months, leaving Sue helpless in the Matrix body. But a day before the New Year's Eve show broadcast, the stabilizer runs out. Sue calls the supplier, but he explains that Elizabeth is the only source of the substance, and they must switch to replenish supplies. There's no other option. Sue, nearly fainting, begins the switch. Her boyfriend hears strange sounds from the bathroom, but she won't open the door. Inside is already a hideous bald woman with a grotesque hump. Eventually, she screams at him, and he flees. After transforming, Elizabeth, now looking monstrous, calls the substance operator and asks to end the experiment, then heads out to retrieve the final batch. Back home, she drags Sue's body into the living room, preparing to inject her with a serum that will end her twin's life. However, as she prepares, she stares at Sue's portraits and realizes she can't bring herself to kill her younger self. She brings Sue to consciousness. Seeing the half-empty syringe and realizing what Elizabeth had intended, Sue flies into a rage and beats her matrix to death. Afterward, Sue heads to the New Year's show. She's dressed in a luxurious gown, but suddenly feels unwell and rushes to the bathroom. Due to her matrix death, her body begins deteriorating rapidly. First, her teeth fall out, preventing her from smiling at sponsors as Harvey wants. Then a nail peels off and an ear drops. In panic, she races home and injects the last of the activator, hoping to create a new version of herself. But instead, a monstrous form, Eliza Sue, emerges, a grotesque fusion of both versions. The monster recalls her arrival at the casting and tries to tidy herself up, donning the dress and a makeshift Elizabeth Sparkle mask, then heads to the show. When she arrives at the television center and steps onto the stage to address the audience, her mask falls off, and screams of horror erupt from the crowd. She's branded a monster, and the audience flees in panic. A man attempts to stop her, but soon her horrific body floods the entire hall. What remains of Eliza Sue stumbles out of the studio and disintegrates in the street. Elizabeth's face manages to crawl up to her star on the Walk of Fame, where she lifts her gaze, smiles, and fades away. In the morning, a cleaning crew wipes away the pool of blood she left behind, erasing all memory of the actress forever.
Thank you so much, everybody. I'll see you next week.